This message comes from Capital One. The Capital One Venture X business card earns unlimited double miles on every purchase. Capital One, what's in your wallet? Terms and conditions apply. Find out more at CapitalOne.com/VentureXBusiness.
Hello, hello. I'm Brittany Luce, and you're listening to It's Been a Minute from NPR, a show about what's going on in culture and why it doesn't happen by accident. This summer, I bet you've been hearing a lot about the immigration detention center that the state of Florida built in the Everglades called, quote, Alligator Alcatraz.
We have a lot of bodyguards and a lot of cops that are in the form of alligators. You don't have to pay them so much. But I wouldn't want to run through the Everglades for long. It will keep people where they're supposed to be.
The term Alligator Alcatraz was first coined by Florida's Attorney General in June of this year. The detention center opened in July, and now
the Department of Homeland Security now moving detainees out of Alligator Alcatraz Detention Center in the Everglades. All of this coming just days after a federal judge ordered parts of the state-run facility dismantled, siding with environmental activists who argued it violated federal law.
It's slated to close very soon. The ruling cited poor waste management and hasty construction that, quote, creates irreparable harm, end quote, to the Everglades ecosystem. But as the doors close, I want you to think about this symbol at the center of all this. Yep, the alligator. The terrifying, to me at least, reptile has become like a mascot to the detention center, with the Trump administration and members of the GOP posting cryptic memes of alligators in U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement, or ICE gear. You can even get Alligator Alcatraz merch. But it's not the first time that alligators have been used as a threatening symbol in the South. And that history is a dark one.
This was a very common part of the sort of Jim Crow era.
That's freelance journalist and fiction writer Asher Elbine.
There were knife handles where the sheath would be an alligator and the sort of like the handle of the knife would be a swimming black child.
He's reported on nature and wildlife for outlets like the New York Times, Scientific American, and Texas Monthly.
And one of the things that I think is really interesting about this is that it is clearly a very fundamental part of the racial imagination in the South generally and in Florida specifically, this idea that alligators were sort of acting as prison guards, as cops, as agents of the Jim Crow racial order.
And who do you think these imaginary alligators target? Black people.
Alligator bait is such a term that's been dated back to at least the 19th century.
That's Raisa Habersham, the race and culture reporter at the Miami Herald.
It's been used to describe Black children who were placed near swamps to kind of lure alligator out for you to hunt. And so when you think about that, and you fast forward to today, there's similar imagery in kind of making paraphernalia out of Alligator Alcatraz.
Before the judge's decision to shut down Alligator Alcatraz, I sat down with Raisa and Asher to help you understand how the alligator and all its cultural baggage in the American South has come back to bite in 2025.
Part of what's kind of launched it into the lexicon, Alligator Alcatraz, is just that it's a facility where you're housing immigrants that are believed to be here without documentation. And then there's this conversation that comes up that, maybe the alligator in the swamp will possibly eat someone who tries to escape. And there are levels to that, right? There's been past conversation about whether or not this actually, has happened. But I would add the extra layer is you will see past artifacts of Black children being depicted as bait for alligators. And so when you think about that, and you fast forward to today, there's similar imagery in kind of making paraphernalia out of Alligator Alcatraz.
It's clearly a very fundamental part of the racial imagination in the South generally and in Florida specifically, this idea that alligators were sort of acting as prison guards, as cops, as agents of the Jim Crow racial order. And what's really interesting about that is that it doesn't actually seem like many of the then enslaved people and then later sort of descendants of enslaved people were particularly terrified of alligators, but it was an object of deep faith on the part of the sort of white ruling racial caste that black people were terrified of alligators. And that's interesting in part because if you look at the sort of history of European settlement and the settlement of people they dragged along into the South, the people who were really twitchy around alligators were white people. Europeans come to the southeastern part of North America, and they are not used to large predatory reptiles being in the swamps.
Right.
Many of the people that they...
A big theme in Europe, right?
Many of the people they brought to that area knew basically what a crocodile was, and there was not this sort of like almost supernatural terror that you see in the part of the way that especially like early white settlers sort of position themselves as having total mastery of these animals that they're totally not scared of, but they're talking about all the time. And by the way, the enslaved people, they're so scared of them, but not us. You know, we're so manly.
There's a familiar projection. I'm sensing a familiar projection here. When I think about this imagery that each of you have brought up, specifically from the Jim Crow era, it makes me think about some images that I've seen recently. Conservative memes, sometimes shared by government agencies or the White House, that are depicting alligators as ICE agents, or images of alligators wearing baseball caps that say ICE on the top. What's the connection between alligators being depicted as essentially slave catchers or police officers or rangers of some sort that are meant to catch black people from these images from the 19th and 20th century in the past, and then alligators being depicted as ICE agents in conservative memes today? What's like the connection that you see here?
Well, at the risk of being overly blunt, I think that there is a shared racist and a shared, frankly, segregationist logic to it. That if you have a society that prioritizes placing a certain group of white people at the top of the imagined racial hierarchy, then it makes a natural argument in the sense that, of course, the alligators terrorize the people that we want terrorized because they're supporting our claim to a spot on the top of the hierarchy. And in Jim Crow rhetoric and Jim Crow sort of material culture, like these kind of postcards, that argument is made very explicitly. Today, when the focus of the current administration is so dead set against undocumented people or people they believe to be undocumented as a part of this country, then I think it is a very shared piece of that logic to then again turn to the alligator and say, and see, here is this carnivorous animal that in our imagination is so terrifying and so scary and so eager to eat people, and you should be scared of it because you're not people like we are, that you can be disposed of. Or the picture of the policeman in a predominantly black neighborhood, or the picture of a slave catcher, those are all somewhat in conversation with each other. But when you make it the alligator, leaving aside the actual animal, which I really can't emphasize enough, generally does not attack people, but the mythical alligator exists to harm people. That is the way that we think about it. And so when you say, here is an ICE agent, and the ICE agent is an alligator, to saying, you will be consumed, you will be swallowed up, it is a fundamentally dehumanizing message. And I think in its dehumanization, it's a fundamentally very racist message.
You know, talking about the symbolism of the alligator and deconstructing these images, I can't help but also think about the name. The official name of this detention center is Alligator Alcatraz. But lots of people, journalists included, feel uneasy using a name that many have described as dehumanizing. I wonder, what's the meaning behind this name? And why is the language used to refer to this detention center worth considering more closely?
That's a good one. I do not want to put words in the mouth of this administration. It's hard to say if there was consideration given about the history of alligator bait. But I will say that when you think about its name, the idea that this is a facility in a swampy area, it probably was reason to believe, oh, okay, alligators. And then the idea of imprisonment, there may have been conversation about, oh, we kind of want this to be like our Alcatraz. So this is not me necessarily excusing it, but the idea of alliteration. When you think about the fact that there's another facility that is already open and it's already been coined, quote, deportation depot.
Depot, right.
Yes. So it's hard to say that there has been consideration given about what these words actually mean together and what the implication could be. Because as Asher said, if the thought process is I look at you as beneath me and you're inhumane to me, then that's not going to cross my mind when naming this facility anyway.
I mean, to your point, that kind of alliterative title is something, like you said, we're not just seeing with Alligator Alcatraz, we're seeing it with Deportation Depot. Speedway Slammer, I've heard about in Indiana. And the most recent one, at least to me, I heard of is Cornhusker Clink in Nebraska. These kind of like alliterative, I think maybe even playful names, we're seeing this as a pattern that definitely feels strategic.
It does feel that way. I wonder how much of it was tied to the intention to license paraphernalia to sell and then fundraise. So it stands to reason, why the alliterative names.
Yeah. It could also make it easier for supporters to sell merchandise, which is something that's already been happening. Coming up.
From where I'm sitting, it looks like the glee of it and the playfulness of it is very intentional because fundamentally they think this is fun. I think they're serious in the way that the anti-Semites leading into World War II were deadly serious.
Stick around.
This message comes from Schwab. Everyone has moments when they could have done better, like cutting their own hair or forgetting sunscreen, so now you look like a tomato. Same goes for where you invest. Level up and invest smarter with Schwab. Get market insights, education, and human help when you need it. Learn more at schwab.com.
This message comes from Capital One. The Capital One Venture X business card has no preset spending limit, so the card's purchasing power can adapt to meet business needs. Plus, the card earns unlimited double miles on every purchase, so the more a business spends, the more miles earned. And when traveling, the Venture X business card grants access to over 1,000 airport lounges. The Venture X business card. What's in your wallet? Terms and conditions apply. Find out more at CapitalOne.com/VentureXBusiness.
This message comes from First Leaf. As summer evenings give way to the cool calm of fall, mark the season with wines made just for you. First Leaf makes it simple. Just take their quiz and personalized selections are delivered to your door. No wine aisle guessing, no errands, only wines you'll truly love. Savor autumn's arrival at tryfirstleaf.com/autumn with promo autumn. Your first 6 bottles are just $44.95. That's tryfirstleaf.com/autumn.
I'm reminded of a really famous quote by Jean-Paul Sartre, where he was talking specifically about anti-Semitism. But he has this line where he talks about how the anti-Semite has the right to play. Like, because they do not take language seriously, because they are acting and delight in acting, he notes, in like fundamental bad faith. There's a sort of like a nasty playfulness to the kind of rhetoric that Sartre was seeing in the anti-Semitism running up to World War II, and that I think you can see in the Jim Crow, gator bait stuff, and in this, right? Where it's because you don't believe that the people that you hate are people, because their suffering is not the suffering of real people, not real people like you, then you have the right and the freedom to treat the suffering that you are inflicting on them trivially. You have the right and the freedom to market it. You have the right to sell cutesy little names on cutesy little postcards. And there is, I think, a fundamental frivolousness here that, again, as Raisa said, it's hard to know quite what is going on in the thinking of anyone involved in the administration. But from where I'm sitting, it looks like the glee of it and the playfulness of it is very intentional, because fundamentally they think this is fun. They think it's funny. They think that the cute little names are funny. And I think they're serious in the way that the anti-Semites leading into World War II were deadly serious about what they wanted to do. But in terms of the way that they frame it, it's always, well, it's sort of a joke, right? Like, it makes it very difficult to engage with seriously, because they don't seem to be engaging with it seriously. I mean, Speedway Slammer, Cornhusk Clink, like, it's hard to say and reckon with, like, what these really are, which these are not just deportation centers, these are detention centers, and giving them a cutesy little nickname maybe allows people to pretend that's not what they are.
That makes me think about a conversation that we had on an earlier episode about ICE memes, and our guests indicated that a lot of these memes had a very, to your point, Asher, LOLJK tone that kind of obscured the horrors of the real life situations they were depicting. It seems like there's a connection there between some of these memes and also these kind of very silly names that are, obscuring the real devastation that is happening at these facilities.
I think for some people, it's kind of a question of what is the means to the end? Is the goal here, strictly to get people in this detention center who you believe to be undocumented, or is the goal to kind of merchandise and sell product to kind of fundraise for a longer goal? But to your point, Brittany, there are families that have been concerned about the health and well-being of their loved ones in this facility. We've reported that some people aren't getting proper medication that they need, and, that's a big concern.
Even for those of us who live outside of Indiana or Nebraska or Florida, why is it important that all of us pay attention to what's happening with this detention center and how it's being presented to us?
Sure. One thing in my reporting that I've kind of spoken to other people about, other experts, is, they've said Florida has kind of been the litmus test for what you see happening in other parts of the South. Think about criticism of critical race theory. That was a hot word at one point. And you think about anti-woke. There's been this conversation that you have to teach certain things certain ways. And then you think about this anti-DEI, these conversations. Many of these conversations we've kind of already seen happen in Florida. I'm originally from Georgia. So some of the conversations that had happened in Florida, I saw happening in Georgia. And before you knew it, there were similar laws on the local level enacted. So for people who are outside of Florida and these other states, you kind of get a picture, or a glimpse rather, of what could be headed to your state based on what experts have kind of already seen and stated has happened here.
So it could be a sign of things to come.
I mean, I think Raisa really hit the nail on the head. It is something that I think the administration writ large and the sort of political forces that are allied with the administration have shown that they really want to be in every state. And what will happen to people who are considered to be undocumented must expand, because the impunity that is required to simply grab someone off the street because they look like they might be undocumented will fold in documented, registered non-citizens and eventually citizens. It's already, I think, happening. And so basically the law has to protect everybody if it's going to protect anybody. And the existence of places like Alligator Alcatraz or any of these sort of spin-off cutesily named facilities is actively eroding the protections that I think all of us have sort of taken for granted as citizens in the United States.
So even though the name Alligator Alcatraz might be silly, what it represents when it comes to immigration is much more serious. I really appreciate you both digging into this symbolism with me. I'm really glad we had this conversation. Thank you both so much.
Thank you so much for having us.
Thank you.
That was freelance journalist Asher Elbine and Miami Herald reporter Raisa Habersham. And of course, for all you listening, since we had this conversation, a federal judge ordered the closing of the detention center, in part because of concerns brought by environmental advocacy groups and the Miccosukee tribe. And I'm going to put on my influencer hat for a second and ask you to please subscribe to this show on Spotify, Apple, or wherever you're listening. Click follow so you know the latest in culture while it's still hot. This episode of It's Been a Minute was produced by
Lennon Sherburne,
Corey Antonio Rose.
This episode was edited by
Nina Patak.
Our supervising producer is
Barton Girdwood,
our executive producer is
Verilyn Williams.
Our VP of programming is
Yolanda Sanguini.
All right, that's all for this episode of It's Been a Minute from NPR. I'm Brittany Luce. Talk soon.
This message comes from Jerry. Car insurance shopping used to be a nightmare. Endless forms, hold music, and mysteriously rising rates. Thankfully, there's Jerry. Jerry handles the entire insurance shopping process, from comparing quotes side by side to purchasing your policy and even helping you cancel your old coverage, all in one app. In just minutes, Jerry can check for quotes from up to 50 top insurers. So before you renew your policy, download the Jerry app or head to jerry.ai/NPR. Support for NPR and the following message come from IXL Online. Is your child asking questions on their homework you don't feel equipped to answer? IXL Learning uses advanced algorithms to give the right help to each kid, no matter the age or personality. One subscription gets you everything. One site for all the kids in your home, pre-K to 12th grade. Make an impact on your child's learning. Get IXL now. And NPR listeners can get an exclusive 20% off IXL membership when they sign up today at IXL.com/NPR.